Hi folks, great job this week. Now let's continue to talk about testing hypothesis 1. And if you did not run correlation or simple regression last time because those situations did not apply to you, then most likely you will be running a t-test this week, and so stay on. Now, first of all, you want to think about, do you need to run a t-test? In order to figure that out, you want to think about what your IV, independent variable, and DV, your dependent variable, are. And so if you need to jog your memory, feel free to go back to the introduction of your poster or go back to week 2 where you submitted this information. And then you want to think about what types of variables you have. Do you have continuous variables? Do you have categorical variable? Whatnot. And so you will want to think about the type of variables that you have. And then you want to think about the relationship that you're expecting between your independent and dependent variables. Now that will generally help you determine what type of analysis to run, but I wanted to show you a couple of charts also to help you figure this out. So first of all, do you have an independent variable that is a categorical variable with 2 levels? So these are generally yes or no questions that we had in our data set. And if you answered yes, my independent variable is categorical and has 2 levels, then you will want to run an independent samples t-test. If you said no, then let's go to the next slide. And so this is a slide that you saw last week as well. But do you have 2 continuous variables? If yes, then you will want to think about whether you're testing for change in your continuous variables. So in this instance, when we're talking about paired samples t-test, it will be the same dependent variable measured twice. And if that is the instance, then you will want to run the paired samples t-test. So if you have 2 continuous variables, so your independent variable and dependent variable are both continuous, but they're not measures of the same construct, then you want to go back to last week and run correlation or simple regression. But if your independent and dependent variables are basically the same construct, same variable, so those would be the same variable measured twice, then you will want to run the paired samples t-test. Of course, if you said, no, I do not have 2 continuous variables, then most likely you will want to run the independent samples t-test. So go back to the prior slide. So hope this is helpful in helping you figure out which t-test to run. So if you're running an independent samples t-test, something you want to think about first is whether your dependent variable should be measured at pre-test or post-test. Now, this is researcher's choice based on what you're interested in and also just in general your personal expectation or logic. And so if you were to measure your dependent variable at pre-test, then you're basically examining the concurrent relationship between your independent variable and the dependent variable. And so they are measured at the same time and they exist basically a priori before anything has happened. And so you're looking at a pre-existing relationship between your IV and DV. If you're thinking about post-test as the right time to measure your dependent variable, then the idea is pretty similar because your independent variable and dependent variable were measured on the same day, but not exactly at the same time. And so your dependent variable may have been influenced either by time or by the usage of psychology pathways, but it does give you a tiny bit of time difference between when your independent variable and dependent variable have been measured. And so if you tend to think in terms of an effect, like maybe an independent variable is kind of almost predicting to a dependent variable at a future occasion kind of an instance, if that is the type of relationship you're thinking of in your mind, then the post-test might make a little bit more sense because there's at least that little difference in time between IV and DV. But remember that there's no right or wrong answer. This is a researcher's choice, and so you get to decide whether your dependent variable should be measured at pre-test or post-test, and then go ahead and run with that. Now, if you're running an independent samples t-test, then first of all, you want to follow the procedures you've seen in lecture to test your hypothesis. And so go ahead and run your independent samples t-test. Now, when you do that, make sure to run your Levene's test first, and then you can use that to update your code for your t-test where you state the var.equal. And then go ahead and report what you find in the results section of your poster. And so we're going to go over that in a couple minutes. And when you do that, make sure that you indicate on the poster whether you ran an independent samples t-test or Welch's t-test so that we know whether you had to make a correction for the violation of assumption of homogeneity, say that 10 times fast. And so make sure to let us know which one you ran. Also, be sure to indicate when each of your variables was measured, and so was it at pre-test or at post-test? Make sure to specify that as well. Now, if you're running a paired samples t-test, then you want to think about the relationship you expect to find between the two time points for your dependent variable. Should your dependent variable have increased between pretest and post-test? Or maybe decreased between pretest and post-test? Or maybe, based on the literature you've read, you don't have an expectation of which direction it would go, except for that you suspect that there will be change between those two time points, in which case this would be a two-tailed test. Whereas if you have a hypothesized direction of the difference, then make sure to use the one-tailed test. So this is where you put the alternative statement at the end of your code. And so if you're running a paired samples t-test, again, follow the procedures shown in lecture to test your hypothesis. So go ahead and run your paired samples t-test. And again, if you have a one-tailed hypothesis, then make sure to include an alternative statement. And then go ahead and report your results in the results section of your poster. When you do that, make sure that you're indicating the direction of change. And so you're not just reporting the statistics for the paired samples t-test, but you write it out in your own words whether there was a positive change or negative change, for example, an increase or decrease over time. Okay, so let's talk about how to transfer your t-test results to your poster. And so here you've got my demo poster, which is nowhere near as wonderful as your own poster. This is for demo purposes, and you have populated some of your results section already. But we're focusing on the part that talks about hypothesis 1. And so go ahead and explain what you used, right? And so independent samples t-test, or maybe you've used Welch's t-test, or paired samples, not paired, what? Paired samples t-test. And then something that I would recommend doing is to just simply go ahead and copy and paste from my lecture slides. And that will give you a nice starter kit for how to write it up. And so here we are. Now, I have copied and pasted directly from the lecture slide for independent samples t-test. This is just an example. And you notice that this is, Times New Roman, so I might want to adjust the font to Times New Roman as well. And I think this is like about 30. And so I might do that as well. So this is assuming that you want to report your results in writing. You could also experiment with doing this in a table format, but this is an example of where you would write it up using your APA style writing. And so you can replace this information with the actual variables that you used, and then replace the values for degrees of freedom, the t value, and then your p-value. But if you're copying and pasting from your lecture slide, at least you have the very basic example of how to write up your results in APA style. And so this is independent samples t-test. So this is one example. Now, how about paired samples t-test? So let's say you're doing paired samples t-test, and let me once again copy over from my lecture slide. So here we are, and I'm just going to remove some formatting problems here and then convert that to Times New Roman 30. Now, again, you have the portion where you can report the t-test, and you can change the information that is in the write-up with the variables that you have. And make sure that you are actually changing this writing in such a way that the direction of change can be found. And so you might say, if you're writing about belongingness to STEM, this is just an example, but see how I've written down the notion that belongingness to STEM score increased between those two time points? And then you can replace the information here with the actual statistics that you found. And that's probably one of the easiest ways to report the results for your hypothesis 1. All right, so have fun. And if you encounter any issues or have any questions, please let me know and I'm happy to help. I'm always happy to hear from you. So have a great time and look forward to seeing the results of your hypothesis 1 when you're done. Take care. Bye for now.